This is Max. He's been in the shelter for 1,095 days, 3 full years. Every single morning he does the exact same thing. He walks to the front corner of his kennel, sits down and stares at the hallway. The staff here know him well. They feed him, they walk him, they clean his space, but being cared for isn't the same as being wanted. Every day he gets 30 minutes in the outdoor run. He doesn't play anymore. He just walks the perimeter slowly, sniffing the same spots, looking at the same trees beyond the fence. Then he comes back inside, back to his corner, and he sits again. He's been doing this for 3 years exactly. The hardest days are Saturdays. Families come through, excited voices echoing down the hallway, children pointing at kennels, laughing at the energetic dogs. Max watches every single visit. He used to stand up when people approached. He used to wag his tail, press himself against the gate, try to get their attention. He stopped doing that about a year ago. The staff noticed when it happened. They see everything. They see how he watches people walk past. They see how he lowers his head when they choose another dog. They see how he returns to his corner after visiting hour's end. They don't talk about it much. What is there to say? On Saturdays, the shelter gets crowded. Max doesn't handle crowds well anymore. He used to love people. The staff have records going back to when he first arrived. Under temperament, they wrote the words friendly and outgoing. That was 3 years ago. On weekdays, when the shelter is quiet, he sleeps most of the day. Not because he needs rest, just because the hours pass easier that way. His kennel sits at the end of the hallway, last one on the left. There are 22 dogs in this facility right now. 18 of them have been adopted since Max arrived. He's seen every one of them go home. He's watched staff members walk them out with new leashes, watched families carry them through the front doors, watched the kennels get cleaned out and filled again with new dogs who don't stay nearly as long. A family came very close once. They spent almost 10 minutes at his gate, asking questions, reading his information card, watching him. Max stood the entire time, perfectly still, eyes locked on them. The father opened the gate, stepped inside, knelt down. Max walked to him immediately, sat right in front of him, waited. The man petted his head, scratched behind his ears, said something to his wife. Then they left. They adopted the German Shepherd 2 kennels down. Last month, one of the staff members printed a new information card for his kennel. She stood there holding it, staring at the number of days, then she taped it to the gate and walked away quickly. The staff had a long meeting about Max. It happened on a Thursday afternoon after hours in the small office near the front desk. Nobody talked about it afterward, but 2 staff members called in sick the next day. In September, they decided to try again. They gave him a full grooming session, brushed his coat until it shined, trimmed his nails, cleaned his ears. They took new photographs in the outdoor area, tried to capture him looking happy. They rewrote his online profile. They used the word devoted. They used the word patient. They used the word waiting. The profile got 47 views in 2 weeks. Nobody came to meet him. He went back to his kennel after the photo session and returned to his corner, lay down and stared at the hallway. Nothing changed. Most days, nothing happens. Max stopped hoping a long time ago. Then one Wednesday, a truck pulled into the parking lot around 2 in the afternoon. An older truck, faded blue paint, a dent in the passenger door. A man got out, mid-40s, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, just looking at the building, then he walked to the entrance. He wasn't planning to adopt. He told the front desk volunteer he was just looking, maybe volunteering, wanted to see the facility first. Every dog started barking when he entered the hallway. The usual chaos. The man walked slowly, stopping at each kennel, reading each card, making eye contact with each dog. In kennel 22, at the end of the hallway, Max heard the footsteps getting closer. Heavy boots, steady pace, different from the usual hurried families. He lifted his head and watched the hallway. The man kept walking, kept stopping, kept reading. Then he reached the last kennel. He stopped in front of Max's gate and stood there. Max didn't move. He just watched from his corner, waiting to see if this person would be like all the others. The man read the information card slowly. His eyes stopped on the number, 1,095 days. He read it again. Then he looked at Max. Max looked back. The man didn't crouch down, didn't make sounds, didn't put his fingers through the fence. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking. After a long moment, he walked back to the front desk. The volunteer looked up, smiled, asked if he saw anyone he connected with. The man nodded once. He said the dog in kennel 22. The volunteer's smile changed. She looked at him differently, like she was trying to understand if he was serious. She asked if he was sure if he wanted to meet some of the other dogs first, the younger ones, the smaller ones. The man said no, just the one in kennel 22. The volunteer stood up slowly. She walked to the hallway, the man followed. She stopped at Max's kennel and looked at the card again, like she needed to confirm which dog he meant. Then she looked at the man. She asked if he understood how long Max had been there, if he knew that long-term shelter dogs sometimes have issues, if he was prepared for that. The man said he understood. She opened a drawer near the front desk and pulled out a key ring. She walked back to kennel 22, the man right behind her. Max stood up when he saw them coming back. He didn't walk to the gate. He just stood in his corner, watching. The volunteer unlocked the gate and pulled it open. She stepped aside. The man stepped into the kennel. Max didn't move. The man walked 3 steps inside and stopped. He lowered himself to one knee right there in the middle of the kennel floor. He didn't reach out, didn't call to Max, didn't make any sudden movements. He just waited. Max stood completely still for 5 full seconds. Then he took 1 step forward. Then another. Then he walked straight to the man and sat down directly in front of him, so close their faces were inches apart. The man slowly lifted one hand and placed it on top of Max's head. Max closed his eyes. His whole body seemed to exhale. The volunteer stood in the doorway watching. She had worked at this shelter for 6 years. She had seen hundreds of adoptions. She had never seen this. The man stayed on one knee for almost 5 minutes, hand on Max's head, neither of them moving. Then he stood up slowly. Max stood with him. The man looked at the volunteer and said he'd like to start the paperwork. 30 minutes later, the man was at the front desk signing forms. The volunteer explained the adoption process, the fees, the follow-up visits, the return policy if things didn't work out. The man nodded at everything, signed everything, didn't ask a single question. Max sat beside him the entire time, leaning against his leg. A staff member who had been there since Max arrived came out from the back office. She was holding a new green leash, still had the tag on it. She knelt down in front of Max and clipped it to his collar. The same red collar he'd been wearing for 3 years. She stood up and her hands were shaking. She handed the leash to the man. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. 2 other staff members appeared in the hallway. They stood together, watching. Nobody smiled. This wasn't that kind of moment. Max walked through the shelter hallway for the last time. He didn't look at the other kennels, didn't look back at his corner. He walked straight ahead beside the man, matching his pace exactly. They reached the front door and the man pushed it open. Max stepped outside. 1,095 days after he'd first walked in. He stopped on the sidewalk and stood completely still, nose lifted, breathing in air that didn't smell like disinfectant and concrete. The man waited. He didn't pull the leash, didn't rush him. He just stood there and let Max take his time. After a moment, Max looked up at him. The man nodded toward the truck. They walked to it together. The man opened the passenger door. Max had never been in a vehicle before. He hesitated, looking at the seat, at the interior, at the man. The man patted the seat once. Max jumped in. He sat on the passenger seat, perfectly still, looking straight ahead through the windshield. The man closed the door, walked around, got in the driver's side. He started the engine. Max didn't move. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Max turned his head and looked out the window. The shelter got smaller behind them. He watched it until they turned the corner and it disappeared completely. The drive took 20 minutes. Max sat the entire time, watching everything pass by the window. Trees, houses, other cars, people walking, dogs on sidewalks. Things he'd only seen from behind a fence for 3 years. When they pulled into a gravel driveway, the man turned off the engine and sat for a moment. He looked at Max. Max looked back. The man opened his door and got out. He walked around and opened Max's door. Max jumped down onto the gravel and stopped. He looked at the house in front of him. Small, single-story, white paint peeling in places, a covered porch with 2 chairs. He looked at the yard, unfenced grass that needed mowing, a large oak tree in the corner. He lowered his nose and smelled the gravel, the grass, the air. The man started walking toward the house. Max followed, staying right beside him. They walked up 3 wooden steps to the porch. The man unlocked the front door and pushed it open. He stepped inside. Max stood in the doorway. The man turned around, looked at him, stepped aside to make room. Max walked in slowly. The house was quiet. Living room to the left, kitchen straight ahead, hallway to the right. Hardwood floors, worn furniture, everything clean but old. Max stood in the entryway and didn't move. The man closed the door behind them. He unclipped the leash from Max's collar and hung it on a hook by the door. Then he walked into the living room and sat down in an armchair. Max watched him. The man didn't call him over, didn't pat the couch, didn't say anything. He just sat there. Max walked slowly into the living room. He sniffed the couch, the coffee table, the bookshelf against the wall. He walked to the armchair where the man sat and sniffed his boots. Then he turned around once and lay down on the floor right beside the chair. The man reached down and rested his hand on Max's side. Max's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. For the first time in 1,095 days, his body completely relaxed. The man sat in his chair, hand on Max's side, and looked out the window at the afternoon light coming through. He didn't move for a long time. That night the man made dinner in the kitchen. Max followed him, staying a few feet back, watching everything. The man filled a metal bowl with water and set it on the floor near the back door. He filled another bowl with food and set it beside the water. Max walked over slowly, sniffed both bowls, then ate. He ate slowly, carefully, like he was still expecting someone to take it away. When he finished, he drank half the bowl of water, then sat down and looked at the man. The man was sitting at a small kitchen table, eating from a plate. He looked at Max and nodded toward the living room. Max walked back to the living room and lay down in the same spot beside the armchair. Later, when the sun went down and the house got dark, the man turned on a lamp in the corner. He sat in his chair and opened a book. Max lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes half closed. Around 9, the man stood up. Max's head lifted immediately. The man walked down the hallway. Max stood and followed. The man stopped at a bedroom at the end of the hall. He turned on the light. A bed, a dresser, a window with curtains drawn. On the floor at the foot of the bed there was a large dog bed, dark blue, looked new. The man pointed at it. Max walked over and sniffed it. He stepped onto it with one paw, testing it. Then he stepped fully onto it and turned around twice. He lay down. His whole body sank into the cushion. The man changed into different clothes, turned off the overhead light, left the hallway light on. He got into bed. Max watched him from the dog bed. The man said one word: "Good night." Then he rolled over, facing the wall. Max rested his chin on the edge of the dog bed. The house was completely silent. No barking from other kennels, no footsteps in hallways, no metal gates clanging shut, just silence. Max closed his eyes. He slept through the entire night without waking once. When morning came, the man's alarm went off at 6. Max was already awake, sitting on his bed, watching. The man got up, got dressed, walked to the kitchen. Max followed. The man led him outside into the backyard. Max stepped out onto the grass and stopped. The yard was bigger than it looked from the front. Grass, the oak tree, a wooden fence along the back. No other dogs, no concrete, no chain link. He walked the perimeter slowly, nose down, taking in every smell. The man stood on the back step and watched. After a few minutes, Max came back. The man held the door open and Max walked inside. The man filled his bowls again. Max ate. This became the routine. Every morning at 6, every evening at 5. Walks around the neighborhood on weekends. The man didn't talk much, but he was always there. Max followed him everywhere. Room to room, inside to outside, morning to night. 3 weeks after Max came home, the man was sitting in his armchair reading. Max was lying beside him in his usual spot. The man reached down and scratched behind Max's ears. Max rolled onto his side. The man kept scratching. Then Max did something he hadn't done in over a year. His tail started wagging, just a little at first, then more. The man noticed. He stopped reading and looked down. Max's tail kept wagging, thumping softly against the hardwood floor. The man smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. He went back to scratching Max's ears. Max's tail didn't stop. A month later, a neighbor stopped the man while he was checking the mail. She asked about Max, said she'd noticed him, asked how long he'd had him. The man said about a month. She said he seemed like a good dog. The man said he was. She asked where he got him. The man said the shelter across town. She said that was nice of him. The man didn't respond. He just nodded and walked back inside. Max was waiting by the door. 2 months after adoption, the man came home from work and Max was waiting in his usual spot by the front door. But this time when the man walked in, Max stood up and his tail started wagging immediately. The man stopped. He looked at Max. Max walked to him and pressed his head against the man's leg. The man put his hand on Max's head and stood there for a moment. Then he walked to his chair and sat down. Max followed and lay beside him. Everything was the same, but something had shifted. Max wasn't waiting anymore. He was home. 6 months after adoption, the shelter called. Standard follow-up. They asked how Max was doing. The man said he was doing well. They asked if there had been any issues. The man said no. They asked if he needed any support or resources. The man said no. There was a pause on the line. Then the voice on the other end said they were glad, said they'd been hoping it would work out, said Max deserved it. The man said thank you and hung up. Max was lying in a patch of sunlight on the living room floor. The man walked over and sat down on the floor beside him. Max lifted his head. The man scratched his ears. Max's tail wagged. They sat there together in the sunlight, not moving, not needing to be anywhere else. 1 year after adoption, the man took Max back to the shelter, not to return him, to visit. One of the staff members had asked during a follow-up call if he'd ever bring Max by, said the staff would love to see him. The man thought about it for a week, then he loaded Max into the truck. When they pulled into the parking lot, Max recognized it immediately. He stood up on the seat, looked out the window, his body went tense. The man turned off the engine. He sat there, hand on Max's back. He said one word, "Okay." Max looked at him. The man opened his door, walked around, opened Max's door. Max jumped down but stayed close, right against the man's leg. They walked to the entrance together. The man opened the door. The sound hit them immediately. Barking, the same as always. Max stopped in the doorway. The man didn't pull the leash, he just waited. After a moment, Max walked inside. 3 staff members were at the front desk. They looked up and one of them gasped. They came around the desk immediately, smiling, saying Max's name. Max's tail started wagging. They knelt down, petted him, told him how good he looked, how healthy, how happy. The man stood back and watched. One of the staff members looked up at him with tears in her eyes. She said thank you. The man nodded. They stayed for 20 minutes. The staff showed Max around, let him walk the hallway, see the outdoor area. He didn't seem anxious. He just walked calmly, the man beside him. When they left, Max walked straight to the truck, jumped in, sat down. He didn't look back at the building. On the drive home, the man looked over at Max. Max was looking out the window, ears relaxed, breathing steady. The man reached over and put his hand on Max's back. Max glanced at him, then went back to watching the window. When they got home, Max jumped out of the truck and walked straight to the front door. He sat down and waited for the man to unlock it. The man opened the door. Max walked inside, straight to his spot in the living room, and lay down. The man stood in the doorway and watched him. Max looked completely at peace. The man walked to his chair and sat down. He reached down and rested his hand on Max's side. Max's eyes closed. 3 years in a shelter. 1,095 days of waiting. And then one Wednesday, his person walked in. The man didn't save Max. They saved each other. And every single day of waiting was worth it for this. For this quiet house, this worn armchair, this spot on the floor. For this person who showed up and stayed. Max was home. Finally, completely home.